We are live. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at the Nevada-Israel Connection, Making the Desert Bloom, a celebration of the Nevada-Israel relationship. We are pleased to be hosting here tonight Deputy Consul General of Israel in Los Angeles to the Pacific Southwest, Eitan Weiss. Deputy Consul General, welcome.
Thank you.
We also have with us Nissim Ezekiel, co-founder of the Nevada Innovation Center, LLC. Nissim, welcome.
Thank you, Dylan.
And we have Pavel. I cannot pronounce your last name. Can you pronounce your last name?
Yes, but Pavel is the nothing.
We'll call you Pavel. Director of International Trade at the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development. And last but not least, George Lubansky, Head of Retail Tech, Food Tech, Sports Tech, New Media, and Consumer Goods at the Israel Economic Commission to the West Coast. Welcome all. So glad you could join us this evening to talk about a great topic and celebrate Israel at 73. We will start with the Deputy Consul General to give greetings. DCM, it is all you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dylan. First, I'd like to thank my good friend Dylan for organizing this great event. I think that this event represents what Israel has to offer to Nevada. I think that there's so many commonalities that we can all work for to share the connections and bring businesses and people-to-people relations and actually make the desert bloom, as Dylan just mentioned. And I really wish this event to be a successful and a great start for a long-term relationship and communications. We, of course, at the consulate here in Los Angeles will be extremely happy to be at your disposal to flourish and encourage these type of relationships. And I wish everyone a great evening. And Dylan, good job. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. All right. All right. We will go next to Nissim Ezekiel. Nissim, we will let you go ahead and moderate. Take it here.
Thanks very much, Dylan, and again to all the participants, all of whom are great partners of the Nevada Innovation Center in terms of what we're doing with Israel. Just a quick intro on our side regarding Nevada Innovation Center, or as we call it, NIC. Look, here in Nevada, first I'm partnering very closely with Michael Saltman. We are the co-founders of Nevada Innovation Center. Michael is a long-time resident of the state, very actively involved in his business in real estate, but also actively working with the UNLV, with the Nevada School of Arts, working with the University Medical Center. Michael has a view of the state that's excellent. I've had a long-time association with Israel on the business side, going back to many years when I was still working in Washington, D.C. So the NIC, the Nevada Innovation Center, saw a strategic opportunity in terms of what was happening in Nevada, a state not known for technology, and what we all know was happening in Israel, but there wasn't full awareness. So in a sense, since both of us were here, both of us know Israel very well, we created what we call a technology bridge. It's a strategic innovation rather than the kind of physical innovation that Israeli companies are very good at. So I call it a strategic innovation. We see an opportunity to link the state, small state of Nevada, Israel, very advanced in technology, but still small, and create what has now become over the last 3 years, I would say, and we'll talk in more detail about what actually has happened. But there are over 20 companies now working and deploying technology from Israel here in the state. Many aspects to it we'll talk further, but that's been our role as Nevada Innovation Center, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to participate in the discussion today and work closely with GOED and the Economic Mission in San Francisco that have been great partners of ours throughout the process. So that's what I'll say for now. Pavel, you want to pick it up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Nissim. I greatly appreciate collaboration between Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development and your Nevada Innovation Center. I am Paweł Pietrasiński. I'm the Director of International Trade in GOED, and I am honored to be invited, and thank you, Dylan, and your organization, ICANN, and great to be also with Israeli consulate general representative, as well as with Israeli Economic Mission. And I have to I have to admit that our relations with Israel are outstanding. We have right now close to $200 million in trade. We have at this moment more than 20 projects together under kind of a Nevada global umbrella, more than scale-ups, also very technology-oriented companies from Israel entering US market through Nevada. A lot of those projects we are doing together in partnership with Nick. But what I can mention is it's water tech, smart mobility, smart city, UAVs, UAS, drone companies, data storage, medtech. A lot of also company on the cybersecurity side. This is outstanding. But what I like to tell at the beginning is that Israel also we just as a Governor's Office of Economic Development publish our of course in the digital way our newsletter, and so far of course presenting all what the Governor's Office is doing in Nevada's for Nevada's economy, and Israel was the only one country featured there, and we basically told the great story of the not only the trade, not only investment, but the real partnership between our organizations and our companies. Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. George, please, I'll turn it over to you. Let me just add that we have had a great working relationship between NIC and the Economic Mission. Goes back a number of years, a number of sectors, and while things have slowed down a bit because of COVID, we certainly stayed very busy and have continued the progress, and I think we're going to have a lot more stuff to talk about shortly. But let me turn it over to you and your perspectives and how you see Nevada and the work we've been doing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Nassim. So I am the Director of Innovation and Strategic Partnerships with the Israel Economic Mission to the West Coast. I'm personally responsible for developing relationships on the West Coast across the verticals of retail tech, sports tech, hospitality tech, and new media. A little bit about the Economic Mission. We are private sector minded, operating within the public sector across a variety of industries and scales. We function across borders and boundaries to bring the Western United States and Israel closer together through mutually beneficial business and trade. The main fields of activity include activities for the promotion of trade and export, initiating and maintaining trade agreements for the improvement of Israel's trade conditions, attracting and encouraging foreign investments, and creating strategic cooperations. I'm excited to be here and very excited to learn more.
Thanks, George. Appreciate that overview. Since we have probably a number of people online listening who may not be fully familiar, the idea of a technology bridge between Nevada, or should I say Las Vegas, and the casinos and Israel is not something people think about right away. And I think in a way that was the niche that we have created. But let me make a couple of points and get your feedback, both Pavel and George. I think the last 3-4 years, there are about 20 companies working here. Okay, Israeli technology deployed on the ground. There's been a Bird Foundation grant between the local company Avisite and Manam in Israel. So we are moving in many directions. At the same time, Nevada is a starter in a sense. If you compare it to large states, certainly George, where you're based in California or New York or Michigan, and even now Arizona, Nevada is still a smaller part of the puzzle. So we see a lot of opportunities, but one of the things I have noticed so far is if you look at the client base for the Israeli technology companies, and I'm just reading to you the partnerships here in Nevada, okay, they tend to be official government agencies. Nevada Department of Transport, testing out the bridge technology on the Bird grant, the Regional Transport Commission of Southern Nevada, as well as up in Reno, the City of Las Vegas and the City of North Las Vegas, Las Vegas Metro Police, Convention Authority, NIAS, the Autonomous Systems Group, Global Economic Alliance, of course, GOED, the 2 universities, by the way, particularly University of Nevada, Reno, the Nevada Center for Applied Research, Carlos Cardillo, the head there, has traveled with us to Israel. But when you look at that, the only private-to-private collaboration has been between Avisite, the drone company that got the Bird grant. And in a sense, there's a much bigger opportunity there. So on the one hand, very strong relationships built up with official agencies who are actually deploying technology for the benefit of Nevada residents, perhaps a little less private to private or business to business than one might expect. So I just wanted to put that point on the table to say it's very active. All the agencies are playing and have traveled to Israel, are deploying technology. We had two more conversations together today with the Regional Transport Commission of Southern Nevada regarding what happens when the Raiders Stadium opens up and all of a sudden there are 70,000 people half a mile from the strip. Okay, so transport efficiency. So all of these are good for Nevada, but I just wanted to your thoughts on the balance between public agencies and maybe in the future more B2B context, particularly George, Pavel, either of you, please, if you can address that a little bit.
Yeah, okay, I may start, and just to follow, Nissim, your comment about the, I would say, G2G or even G2B involvement, I have to tell that when we started to count the number of projects from different binational US-Israeli foundations in Nevada, this is it's closing to almost 2 million. And then when you mention Avisite, the Desert Research Institute is the second. University of Nevada is probably the biggest recipient right now. But talking about basically B2B relations, I think one of the companies we had a chance to talk about with great plans for the incubating new technologies and accelerating Israeli companies in the United States was Avnon Group. And basically looking for kind of the creating such a kind of the technology incubator and accelerator at the same time in Nevada could be very interesting idea. And they of course COVID came, but COVID came and Israel practically did it in the top position in the world regarding basically the battle against it, and was one of the first basically to practically win this war. But on the other hand, you are right now known in the world not only as a startup nation but also as a scale-up nation. In fact, your companies are coming to even young one coming, but of the high growth, coming to the United States, looking for a kind of the soft, I would say soft landing zone from where they can expand to the whole United States, and Nevada could be the place. And just a few arguments for that. One is that, of course, everyone talking about business climate and tax, of course, climate there, and we are always between 4 to 6 position in the United States. But what is even more important is the kind of the technology based, which is kind of the coming from inside of Nevada, like we have the biggest provider of the data storage, like Switch, or we have the companies which are basically coming from other states or other countries to Nevada to create something special. I will mention Tesla and their Gigafactory 1, because Nevada is right now together with, of course, with in the joint venture with Panasonic is the biggest producer of batteries for cars and other energy storage applications. So it's very, very interesting why Nevada is able to attract such a high technology companies, and one of the reasons is basically friendly regulations, but also I believe that we are able to do what we are actually doing with your organization. I would tell that this is a real public-private partnership at work, because it's if we have a problem, it's relatively short. We will need a relatively short time to find the solution, and eventually also to find decision makers. And my office is basically a governor's office. So having that in mind, we are able to act faster probably than many other bigger states and agencies. So that would be probably the major idea behind the whole concept that Nevada could be, especially for the Western states, could be a way of kind of the soft landing for high technology Israeli companies with a very easy reach to one day of track is 60 million customers around there, but with basically with lower cost of the business and absolute openness of Nevada's people to foreigners, to people coming from outside. It's basically in my job and what I am doing for a government. It's very few people actually from Nevada. It's all of us came from somewhere. And really, it creates a very unique environment to grow also international businesses.
Right. Thanks very much, Pavel, for that. George, just picking up on what Pavel was talking about, you're sort of a primary recipient as the economic mission for a lot of the inquiries that you're getting from Israel, not just about Nevada, of course, but you're responsible for the West Coast. How have you seen that developing? And from your perspective or the mission's perspective, how have you seen the private interest in Nevada? And we will come back a little bit later how we can perhaps expand on it further, but maybe just a perspective from your side as the primary interactor with many of the Israeli private sector companies.
Absolutely. As Pavel mentioned, Nevada is kind of like a playground of sorts due to its lessened stance on regulations, particularly in smart mobility. It allows these Israeli companies to enter the state and really hone in on their pilots, test, and potentially even scale, while also building a whole infrastructure in Nevada. For me, it's very important to convey to these Israeli companies that I work with that there is much technological innovation adoption happening outside of Silicon Valley, and to look to places like Nevada where they're really opening their arms to these technologies, are ready to work with these companies, willing to partner and develop technologies that are going to create a better tomorrow.
Thanks. You know, I should make a point, again, for those who are listening into this discussion, that the participation from the Nevada side has been very intense. As you know, George and Pavel too, Nevada has probably undergone a structural transformation with the Tesla factory up in Reno 7-8 years ago. And the pace of change is amazing. When on smart mobility, you mentioned, George, Nevada is one of the most important states in the country in terms of regulations. You have autonomous vehicles actually running on the strip, actually autonomous. Yes, there's a safety driver, but there are very few states. Same with UAS and FAA approvals for test sites. And that's why I think when Michael Saltman and I had this idea 3 years ago, one of the first two big things that happened, both which gave high profile. One was the Bird Foundation grant to Avi site in Manam, which has now come to a very successful conclusion. They just completed, can you imagine, drone-based testing at the Tillman Bridge near the Hoover Dam. I think it's one of the most prominent bridges in the country if you leave aside the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And separately, we had groups of 6 or 7 senior people from the transport agencies, from the city of Las Vegas. Michael Sherwood, the chief innovation officer, traveled to Israel a couple of times for the Smart Mobility Summit run by the Prime Minister's office in October 18 and October 19. Of course, there was none last year. So in a sense, that the foundation is strong, and the issue is to move to the next stage. And you know, I think, Pavel, you'll appreciate this. One of the things that Michael and I feel is, so far, the foundation has been created through technology deployed for the benefit of Nevadans. Let's call it that way, right? Whether it's traffic, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's a little bit of med tech coming up these days too. But we now want to move it to a second layer, which is to add to economic development, not just technology transfer. And in a sense, the state is attracting a tremendous amount of investment, not just Israeli investment, but companies that locate here. And so the point we are making is that this is a great point of launching business, even for larger companies. As you can imagine, tech companies tend to be smaller, but Pavel mentioned the Abnon Group, very heavily involved with Homeland Security technologies, and by the way, also very heavily now involved in all of the economic activity in the Middle East with the UAE. So I just want to say that from our standpoint, A second phase of where we can move this is continue to accelerate the actual deployment of technology for the benefit of Nevada, but also use Nevada as a location, an economic development basis for Israeli companies who may not have previously realized that this is actually a great place to do business, not just to sell technology. And I think, Pavel, you would appreciate that angle is something very important, not just to Go Ahead, but to all the economic development agencies and cities here in the state.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to tell you that you mentioned also bigger companies, and basically and you mentioned also what's happening in Northern Nevada. And for the whole audience, I also encourage you to take a look on the Trix or Tahorino Industrial Center. Basically, it's one of the greatest success in the world because of the size of the industrial park, which didn't exist a few years ago, and right now it's completely outsold. And I would say that we are trying to do the same right now in the south, because the south is the, I would say, another chance for bigger companies to flourish, and also because there is of course a transformation right now in the hospitality industry. Some of the introduction of the new hospitality high technologies will be kind of creating some new human resources, I would say, available for another venture. So Apex on the south side, in the Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, actually, this is another chance to look at, and basically our office is working pretty closely with city of North Las Vegas, but also we have a lot of let's say plans to look on the how to improve and advance the infrastructure in that areas. And what I like to say very strongly, that Nevada, and Nissim, you mentioned that, is a kind of a test bed for the highest technologies, also autonomous ones. And of course, we are just about opening of the Boring company, of another Elon Musk venture, which basically are Teslas underground in the tunnels, moving people. But what is also important, and this is the story I like very much, it's we were contacted last year by our embassy in the UK to organize European trade missions of drone, UAV, UAS companies to United States. And of course, Nevada is a special place because we are one of the 7 states which have kind of the designation of the Federal Aviation Agency to be a testing state for drones. But we have only one designation that the whole state is designated to do this testing. And what happened is that when the UK embassy our embassy in the UK came back to us and saying, okay, we have 80 companies which would like to visit several states. They said, okay, the biggest number of they said European companies were from Israel, actually 9. So this is very interesting how, and of course they invited Europe plus Israel plus Turkey, but Israeli UAV drone companies were #1 in that mission, organizing in partnership with Select USA. I have to mention this particular program because we are doing a lot of right now with Department of Commerce, and Select USA is doing a lot on the technology side as well. And really in the soon we will be also having and Nevada will be present still on virtual, but Select USA Summit June 6-9 in virtually, but theoretically in Washington, D.C. So that would be also another chance for us to interact and of course to meet still virtually Israeli companies.
Thanks, Pavel. By the way, I should mention one thing which slipped in my introduction. And when I talked about the partnerships with Nevada, the very first one actually is in a sector, George, that no surprise to anybody, is water tech. There was a partnership, a formal funding partnership between the Israel Innovation Authority and WaterStart, which was was founded by GoEd, now operates across with many countries. There are 3 or 4 Israeli water tech companies, and there was just a renewal of that partnership between the Innovation Authority and WaterStart. So in a sense, when you go back to the history of the technologies that have been coming from Israel, there was that first start, obviously, with water. So I do want to acknowledge that. Nate Allen is somebody who's worked closely with Israeli water tech, and we hope to expand that. The other point that, in a sense, strikes me is that as we are getting support from both ends. Okay, as I've said, on the Nevada side, to the extent that public agencies and/or the 2 universities are supporting the Israeli tech effort here, in a sense, Nevada state resources are being deployed, if you know what I'm saying. On the one hand, it is commercial, but in many cases, when you talk of the RTC and so on, they're funding some of these pilots. Just a year ago, the Manam Applications did a pilot in Reno, working closely with the University of Nevada Reno team and the RTC in Washoe County to examine a better way to inspect roadway conditions. It was a small project which was funded and paid for by the RTC Washoe. Similarly, on the Israel side, and this I think perhaps is something that could grow further, on the Israeli side, whether it's the Berg Foundation, the Export Institute, or the Innovation Authority that can actually bring resources to the table, there's been a lot of interaction on that front. So George, just sort of picking up on that side, because you're, of course, working very closely with the Israeli partners, how do you see that developing? What's the level of interest? And is there something we are missing that we could use together to build on the foundation that's been created?
Is this in terms of water technology as it pertains to Nevada and Israel's synergy?
No, I was broadening that question, using water as an example of what happened initially, to say, okay, as we go forward, there are so many subsectors, as we said, UAS, smart cities, smart mobility, cyber. But I just sort of want a little bit more sense from you from the Israeli players, the government players on the Israel side who provide such support. How do you see that interaction developing further as we get more and more Israeli companies coming through here? Many of them are funded anyway by the Israel Innovation Authority. They may not be funded for Nevada, but they are certainly funded by agencies like that. So I just wanted a little bit of perspective from you, how you see the Israeli official agencies viewing this opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, the number one goal of any of these Israeli innovation agencies is to promote the export of Israel's trade goods, technologies, and they are positioning these Israeli companies to succeed in America. They go out of their way to create these relationships, provide funding, give all the resources needed for these Israeli companies to succeed. Really, the government and every agency supports the startups. It's a huge goal to boost the GDP of Israel, as well as to create an economic presence in Nevada.
As Pavel knows, we are working closely together to try and strengthen those relationships so that while eventually everyone has to put resources on the table, but that when there is a good opportunity to do pilot projects and move on further, that this combination of support from the Nevada side and the Israel side helps some of the smaller companies. I think larger companies don't need financial support. They just need to know about the opportunity. But a lot of startups, as you know, haven't yet established US offices. They're working from a distance. And that's one of the shorter term challenges, not just due to COVID, but even on an ongoing basis. We're trying to convince people that if you're a Nevada company or a US based company, your opportunities to be seen as a positive candidate for the different RFPs and so on that are being put out is much stronger than simply working from a distance. Pavel, any thoughts further in terms of, we have been discussing Israel to Nevada. It may be useful to look in reverse a little bit. Nevada, Israel, okay? There are some large companies here. You mentioned Switch. Nevada Energy is part of Berkshire Hathaway Energy. There are other sectors like renewable energy. As most people know, there are 2 major Air Force bases just outside Las Vegas. and there is the U.S. Navy Air Force operation, more famously known as Top Gun. So that collaboration, I'm not talking about the defense collaboration, but the commercial aspects of it. Do you see a reverse flow to some degree between Nevada to Israel that may be worth thinking about?
Yes, definitely yes. And let me start with the very unusual sector when we are talking about mobility, because it's still mostly Las Vegas, but this is the I would say trade show, kind of the professional hospitality sector. I'm meaning that we are the capital of trade shows in the world, but good information there, because we always hosted, especially during CES, formerly Customer Electronics Show, we always hosted pretty sizable delegations, business delegations from Israel, and it was just announced. So this is very good timing. Just announced that CES 2022 will be done in a hybrid form. So that would be the physical part and virtual part for those who will not be able to come. So this is the chance, because I believe, judging by the situation right now in COVID-19 in Nevada and Israel, I think we are talking about physical presence. So this is one thing, of course, in that case, but our office also managing the export promotion and collaboration with technology collaboration with other countries. So what we are thinking in the kind of the longer run, 2022, 2023, we are thinking also about organizing trade mission to the state of Israel, and of course we have. We should decide about the sectors, but definitely water tech and drone industry. So maybe also our new but very well developed sector. I'm talking about energy storage, not only batteries, but energy storage is pretty. So this is basically also more widely described as green energy. That would be probably the case to start thinking about finding the right companies in Nevada and finding potential partners in Israel. So definitely we are talking both direction, and we will be there. It's probably this year. That would be generally difficult, I would say, to do it right. But 2022 and 2023 will be a chance for us to start thinking. And this is not only about companies. This is also about universities and our research institutions. So what we are always doing, we are trying to combine forces and trying also to create connections also with higher education institutions, because we strongly believe, even if we build a bridge, I would say, using your language, Nissim, if we build a bridge between both universities and we can start exchanging students and faculties, it's only a matter of time that the companies will be coming back and forth. So having that in mind, we'll be looking for any programs which could support, I would say, student or academic startups. That's one thing, and there is also particular reason for that. In University of Nevada, Las Vegas, we just opened. That was actually during pandemic, but we just opened Blackfire Innovation, which is #1 place in the United States, probably in the world, regarding e-games, regarding electronic competitive games. And of course kind of the new technologies we global companies can test to use in the hospitality sector, which is still the biggest in Nevada. So having that in mind, I really believe in this is our both Nevada's and Israeli famous hospitality sector, but also electronic games, and I think it creates an extraordinary opportunity also to create programs for the kind of the youngest players in that sector, meaning the startups which are basically spin-offs or even student companies still being under the umbrella of both universities in Nevada and Israel.
Right. Right. Thanks, Pavel. In fact, I want to come back to the universities in a minute. But George, one of my questions about the reverse flow, that is potentially from Nevada private sector to Israel, not just the other way. I just read maybe a couple of days ago about the major selection of Google and Amazon Web Services to provide data center services based in Israel for security reasons. That was a major RFP that I think was just announced, and there's more going. I've been following that for some time because Switch is here, the big data center company. They're very busy in the US, so they were not part of that process. But while that's a huge transaction, I was thinking further down that scale, whether there would be similar opportunities for Nevada-based private companies to kind of go on the bridge in the other direction. And this Google AWS RFP grant is just one example. But do you get that kind of sense, George, in terms of the interactions you're having with Israeli companies, or for that matter, with the government?
I think that awareness is increasing steadily. I think over time, the awareness of the bridge going two ways will continue to increase, and there's going to be more opportunities for both Nevadan companies and for Israeli companies to bring their economic impact to each other's location. I think in the future, we'll definitely witness this happening in real time. It's a slow drip, but I think that we're definitely getting there.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, because Nevada is not something that has been thought about as a tech center until very recently, I must say, as a resident of Las Vegas and just reading the daily paper, and Pavel knows this well, I'm sure you hear about it too, the number of companies either establishing new operations here, and they're not just doing it because it's Nevada, they're doing it because it makes business sense, is quite astonishing. And I think we should find a way. In fact, if I have an issue in a sense with how we take this forward and build on the foundation, is that I still think we have a somewhat narrow set of players in this game. Meaning we've got the agencies in Israel, the agencies in Nevada, go ahead included, but all the public agencies. And yet there are a large number of players that deal with Israel and the US broadly speaking, right? They're not all involved in economic development, but they're certainly involved in Israeli US relationships. Certainly the role that ICANN is playing at a different level, and ICANN is hosting this meeting. So one of my thoughts was, how do we get the story spread on a wider basis so people who were not normally thinking of the economic connection, but others, but remember, every one of the agencies has individuals who have great interest in Israel, great interest in technology, and great interest in Nevada. So one of the challenges, it seems to me, is to have the core people continue the work as we are doing now, but perhaps find a way to get greater visibility, greater dissemination of this option so that we can accelerate from a very low base and still keep the pace of activity going. So I don't know, Dylan may have a comment or two about it, perhaps towards this latter half of this, and perhaps there might be some questions on this topic. But that's the challenge I think we have, that it's still a little bit of a narrow network of agencies and people that are working on it. And I wonder if there's some way to expand that dissemination of what is actually going on between Nevada and Israel.
Did you want me to comment on that, Nissim?
Yeah, it'll be, yeah, I think this is, I mean, we've talked quite a bit, the three of us, and I know, Dylan, you and I have discussed this topic, but I'm looking at it as a way to accelerate this movement on the bridge and create knowledge where there may not be. And then once that bridge is created, as we have found, people play on that bridge. You don't have to control what happens on the bridge.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. And we need to do a better job, and especially in our organization, of educating stakeholders for our purpose. Our main audience obviously is legislative, other elected officials at the local, state, and even national level, but also the grassroots. And I think even between those two groups, there's a wide range of people who aren't involved in the kind of grassroots advocacy that we're involved in, but from the business and commercial sectors that I think need to know. So I think that great things like delegations to Israel trade missions and other high-profile events do a good job of helping to elevate the role that you're all playing and help spread the good news to different sectors.
Exactly. Any thoughts about that, Pavel? I mean, are we missing something to support this effort? And I don't mean just money, because everybody wants investment funds, VC funding. That's what I call more traditional business resource requirements. But sort of to broadening the storyline and the stakeholders in this game, I think would be a very useful way to accelerate the process that we have all begun. It's something that Michael Saltman and I discussed quite a bit. How do we expand the group of people or institutions, agencies that are supporting this work between Nevada and Israel?
Nissim, you already mentioned visibility and following Dylan's thoughts. We need to basically engage in more, I would say, educational and promotional initiatives. Why? Because some countries are doing this already with examples are Canada Days and Nevada's legislature, or Polish Business Week. There was also Nevada Days in Europe. We can talk. We can think about how we can do Israeli-Nevada promotional events around some already existing projects or the new ones which are on the horizon. So this is one of the things which we may be more visible in our collaboration. But you are absolutely right. We have incredible, completely unexpected, exceeding all expectations, I would say, the number of relocating companies right now from different states, of course, including our major neighbor in the West. And why? Because the market changed. The way the talents are functioning right now. They are not changing jobs, they are not changing employer, they are just changing place where they are living, because they would like to have better living and better quality of life. So what is happening right now, and Las Vegas is experiencing this on a very high level, high pace, is that the situation that a lot of people migrate to our biggest city, but they are still doing what they were doing before. So that's a very interesting situation. Why? Especially for the technology companies, because those people are still on the market. Yes, they are changing jobs every 3, 4, 5 years. So basically, when the technology companies will be coming to Las Vegas, for example, they will have a bigger pool of talent and people which are reachable within the city limits. So this is the kind of a long-term strategy what we are and city of Las Vegas are doing, but I think it creates a chance also to think about more advanced companies coming directly to Las Vegas. And I am especially thinking about South Nevada. Why? Because such situation like COVID-19 and right now the kind of recovery period, it creates extraordinary opportunities. So still you will have like a lot of I would say human capital is accessible. Because always the biggest problem was that of course bigger companies were coming, and it could take a while to ensure that you have right and of course exact workforce available. Right now with these migrations and with the programs we have workforce innovation programs. We are working with our community colleges to basically with the companies to train or to retrain the workers for basically for the new future jobs. We can do this faster, we can more efficient, and basically it creates a completely new opportunities for new ventures.
Yeah, no, I just want to close out one thing before we perhaps make a few closing comments and then turn it over to Dylan to see if there is any Q&A or if he has some thoughts, questions for us. On the academic side, I just want to highlight that the reference that Pavel made to the UNLV Research Park, just a couple of miles from the airport. I've had Israeli companies beginning to visit. I had one there 2 weeks ago, and already 2 different opportunities are under discussion to locate within the park, not the park as a client, but the park as a gateway to technology and a gateway to demonstrating its technologies. And you mentioned the different things like CES, but there are many smaller conventions that are now beginning to reopen here in Vegas, and the opportunity to be accessing the CEOs of all of these different sectors and companies through a university academic partnership is great. And this really adds to what has already begun with what you have mentioned before, the UNR Nevada Center for Applied Research in Reno. So both the locations are covered. And I think this is something that we haven't thought about too much. Is there a way to more formally create partnerships between the academic side in Israel and Nevada? But I think the foundation today, where it may not have been in place 5-6 years ago, both physical locations, global companies, government funding, and successful examples are already in place. So I think that's a topic we should keep in mind, George. It's not a topic that we have touched upon before, but maybe jointly, I think Israel has some amazing research operations in the major universities. We know that well, but it's hard sometimes to get people to take notice. But I think today we have some real tools here that could be valuable, and I'm seeing the response from some of the newer Israeli companies. Fair enough.
Great. So, so Nisim, we are good to go. We're at nearly the top of the hour, and we don't have any questions, which means you guys were. I have gotten feedback, and we've received comments, and everybody says that the discussion has been interesting and substantive and packed with information. So you guys have done a phenomenal job. Do you guys want to do some final comments, and we'll wrap it up?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I was just going to make a comment. We had not realized we were competing with the President of the United States, but that these things happen. Okay. Anyway, Pavel, George, your final comment.
I really believe in this triangle of collaboration. You need to have to business, you need to have to government, and academia too. So we'll have this in mind. I'm just following your thoughts about higher education, but we'll do in the kind of a combined way, because that's the only way we can make Israeli-Nevada collaboration more technology and innovation intensive. So we were talking about trade missions in both directions, and we will do our best to put all those the elements of this triple helix, yes, together with us, just to make a better impact to our bilateral relations.
Any final comments? Look, I just want to say, for obvious reasons, George, we, Michael and I, and the Nevada Innovation Center have enjoyed great relationships with the Israel Economic Mission to the West Coast and your current Economic Council, Moran Zilberstein. I know that's going to only grow. And just one more thing, if I may, before a closing comment, is that in some of the Israeli programs, such as the Bird Foundation, we are reaching out to major US private intermediaries, all of whom know Israel very well, but have never focused on the sub-opportunity, say, for a client company in energy to partner under the Bird Energy program, and maybe for something that they need. Again, I'm looking at it from the US to Israel, not just the other way. So there are newer directions we are beginning to move. And that's where the partnership with your team has been very, very valuable. But please, any final comments from you, and then I'll close it out.
Thank you, Nisim. I think that there are very many exciting happenings in the very near future with the vaccinations occurring in Israel and across the United States. I think soon we'll be able to send Nevadan companies to Israel, Israeli companies to Nevada. And I think the acceleration of making an economic and people impact both in Nevada and Israel is just on the horizon. And I think that this will be a very fruitful decade for Israeli-Nevada relations.
Great. Thanks, George. Again, final comment here from us, Dylan. Michael and I are thrilled as part of Nevada Innovation Center to have played a central role in this. It was fine to have the strategic innovation. Now there's a big building to be built. and I think it'll be beneficial in both directions. As I always tell people, Dylan, there was a reason we called ourselves Nevada Innovation Center, not Israel Innovation Center. We're interested in the state. We're interested in technology deployed for the people of the state and to build on the opportunity that exists. So I think this has been great. I really appreciate, Dylan, the opportunity for all of us to get together, and for me and Michael, I know, is listening in. But from both our sides, it's a path that we expect to remain very active on going forward.
Absolutely. Well, look, on behalf of ICANN and our Nevada State Committee and our Nevada advocates, I want to thank you, Nisim, again for hosting. I want to say thank you to Eitan from the Israeli consulate for coming in and giving us greetings. And again, a happy birthday to Israel. And Pavel and George, thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. Again, it was phenomenal. And let's do it again sometime soon.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Pavel and George.
You guys were outstanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.